Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. With that, we move on to our first panel discussion for this summit, titled Vision 2030: How can India become a renewable energy powerhouse over the next decade? And it's an honor and privilege to first welcome and introduce the members of this panel. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, International Renewable Energy Agency. Sunil Jain, CEO and ED, Hero Future Energies. Ranjit Gupta, CEO, Azure Power. Rajat Seksaria, CEO, Solar Business, Acme. Sai Baba Vutukuri, CEO, Vikram Solar. And this session will be moderated and chaired by Kanika Chawla, Director, Center for Energy Finance, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Kanika, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you very much to the Economic Times for having us all here today. I think that you're having a virtual renewable energy summit is already a symbol of what the session is titled, India to become a powerhouse for renewable energy. And I think that there is a dedicated summit for it suggests that we are perhaps well on our way to become a renewable energy powerhouse. I'd like to start perhaps with just opening comments from this really illustrious panel that's joining us today to really try and understand what does it mean to be a renewable energy powerhouse. And before we kind of talk about what has worked and what has not worked, I'd like to just think about both for where we are at now, but also when looking forward and looking ahead, especially at the start of this decade for action. It would be quite good to hear from each of you what a powerhouse is kind of symbolized by and how India is perhaps making strides in that direction. So perhaps, Ms. Singh, we'll start with you, especially given that you have a more global focus as well, but of course you understand the Indian market really intimately. What is it that makes India a potential candidate to be a global powerhouse for renewable energy?
Thank you, Kanika, and thank you, Economic Times, for having me at this webinar. It's indeed a pleasure to be among friends. And let me start by saying that the global crisis that we are seeing, the pandemic and the economic crisis that it's triggered, it's really a trailer of what the climate crisis could be like. And I think governments all across have really got their act together very quickly to look at stimuluses and to look at how they can work together with the common objective, and they've done that really fast. So I think this whole scenario has also given us some time to think about what the future should really be. And my sense is that the way the world is going in terms of the energy transition, I definitely think that the energy that we need for the future is something which is very much within our grasp. And if we look at let me give you just one statistics about costs, which will give you a sense of what we're looking at and what we're dealing with. The IRENA cost study very recently came out with a very, very interesting fact that if you were to retire 500 gigawatts of thermal plants, you might actually end up not just saving on power costs, but providing a stimulus of almost 1% to the global economy. So that's the kind of scenario that's before us and the opportunities that we are sitting with. And I think we're really at the tipping point, the critical tipping point that we've all been hoping for. And India definitely is sitting at a situation where it can take advantage of what will unfold in the next decade. But let me stop here and maybe come back to other things.
No, I think that's a really good and important point to think about it as good economics rather than just an ideological shift towards renewables, especially in developing countries. Those are the drivers that will, take this transition to scale. Mr. Jain, you have not just watched this transition closely, but kind of participated, and I would argue to some extent also led this transition. So what has got us this far? Will it take us further?
Good morning, everybody, and good morning to my fellow panelists and all viewers. And thanks to Economic Times bringing in this hot topic, literally, because sun gives us heat, definitely. Although we need light, not heat. Well, Kanika, let me tell you one thing. While India will have a decade of renewables, no doubt, what is more important is everything has to be now linked to climate change. I believe, we must understand that the poor and the have-nots of this world are more impacted by climate change than the people who are affluent. This myth that we are getting impacted, no, it is the poor who get more impacted every year. And they get more impacted because the current conventional energy cannot provide them the energy they need. So the current government, the way they scaled up the things and delivered. You see, we all scoffed at the thing. I remember when Gauri Singh ji was there in MNRE and we used to talk about that 20 gigawatt thing, and we were like, we used to all internally think, oh, this will never happen. And when Prime Minister Modi says 100, and we said, no, it will not happen. But look where we are. I believe, we still scoff, oh, you've not reached the target, but imagine what we have achieved. So India is very strategically located. So, there is some credit for that geographical location also. We are bestowed with that 320 days of sunlight, and we've got vast tracts of land which can be deployed for use of solar energy and renewables. And my question would be that people must talk of renewable and not only solar. I know solar has taken the lead, but wind is equally important for us to deploy energy round the clock across the country. So why we will be a powerhouse, I believe, is the vision of one sun, one world, one grid. I think that's a phenomenal idea. It has implementation challenges, I do not doubt that, but let's at least start regionally. And if that happens, then India is the destination for installation of renewables. So I'll pause there, and we should look forward to it, because what is going to do is that renewables can really add to India's GDP and the jobs which are required. So that is very key to our success of renewables. So renewables is no more, I would say a fashion icon that, okay, I was using renewable energy. No, it is today the need of the poor. If you go to the villages, there are solar panels on a roof of a thatched roof where he is now able to charge his mobile and have a light for his children. So that is what renewables is going to do, and that is what India is going to do.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, and both of you have made the point around the importance of scale and markets to kind of advance the transition. With that, I'll turn to Mr. Gupta, especially because of Azure's experience with the markets, and in some ways, perhaps more experience than any of the other IPPs, given its market listing, etc. So, do you maybe, Mr. Gupta, want to comment on what has worked, but also what has not worked in this period? What are the things that need to be changed to give us a leg up?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to the panelists, and thanks to Economic Times. Kanika, as far as what has worked so far is concerned, right? I mean, I think currently what has worked is the fact that the renewable energy is currently the cheapest form of energy that is available to India, right? Earlier, I mean, and all of us have been in the renewable sector for such a long time. Earlier, when we were going to states and asking them to buy renewable power, it used to always be a struggle because renewable power used to be more expensive than conventional power. There used to always be a push factor. We wanted RPO obligations to be put in place, and this and that and the other. Now, with the renewable energy cheaper than the conventional energy, I think there is a pull factor for the renewable energy which we are looking to supply, and that is helping the states adopt renewable energy much faster than before. At the central level, with the Prime Minister Modi's push for higher renewable capacity, I think the center realizes that there is a climate change issue, that we need to be, more renewable in our energy mix than fossil fuels, and so on and so forth. But where the rubber meets the road, which is at the level of the consumer who's consuming power, which is what is supplied by the states, by the distribution companies, they are more worried about their own finances, about their financial health, and so on. And I think the target that the Prime Minister had set for the country, 175,000 megawatts, which apart from, I think, from the rooftop side, will probably meet and exceed, would not have been possible if this large capacity had not driven down prices. Perhaps if we had kept doing 500,000 megawatts a year, we would not have seen this decline in prices. But because of the fact that we are doing 5, 10, 15,000 megawatts a year, we are seeing a decline in prices, which has helped push renewable energy. So at the end of the day, I think it is the pricing that has mattered as far as the distribution companies are concerned. And unless and until we can keep the prices low, it will become more and more difficult to absorb power. And intermittency is an issue which the renewable energy faces. As time goes by and the percentage of renewable energy in the grid grows, we will see that intermittency will become a challenge for the states. So technical aspects and commercial aspects will play the important role as far as the states looking at absorption of renewable energy is concerned.
Thank you. I think that's a really good segue for me to turn to Mr. Seksaria, especially because both Mr. Jain talked about round the clock and the importance of wind, and then the intermittency, which is, of course, a challenge for all variable renewables, but perhaps slightly more pronounced for solar. So I know that you're in charge of ACME's solar business, and even though that is the more exciting business to be a part of at the moment, given the large wins that solar power is seeing in India, what are perhaps some of the distance that we still need to cover to become this powerhouse that we're discussing this morning?
Yeah, good morning, Kanika, and good morning, all my fellow panelists. It's really delightful to be there and talking about the sector, which I'm sure all of us are very passionate about. So before I delve into the specific answer to your query, allow me a minute to also kind of give in my views on what we have done right, because it's almost a nostalgic journey of last 10 or 12 years that most of us have seen in renewable. So while we now gear up for this big challenge going forward, it's a time to, forums like this allow us to think what we did right, because that may be important going forward. So 3 or 4 things I think which is very important for industry and us to kind of derive satisfaction from. That this is one industry didn't create monopoly. The way the program was structured, we had multiple small players, and players then became medium size or large players, right? So what this has allowed is to unleash the full entrepreneurial power of wider spectrum of Indian businesses, where we don't have a winner take all kind of a situation. The fact that we have multiple developers on this forum and many more working in industry has actually allowed the creativeness, the lobbying with government for renewable energy to work well for the sector. So this is one thing we should not lose sight of. Unlike some of the other sectors like telecom, we don't want a consolidated scene with only 2 or 3 players active, because that would somehow kill that entrepreneurial childlike zeal that this sector has. Second thing, which is very important, is I think we should take a moment and pause some of the visionaries in this sector 10, 12 years back. Then Chief Minister of Gujarat actually had the political courage to buy power at 17 rupees a unit at that time, which actually triggered the transition. I should also give credit to the UPA 2 government, which actually created the National Solar Mission, and even that time they were willing to bundle power at 12 rupees, 13 rupees. So those were visionary steps then, where we had took baby steps, but it came at a political cost or whatever. But today we are reaping the benefits of it. Yes, developer community has chipped in the size that helps us, but those were steps which which will actually put good India in good stead. And third point, which is very important, the tariff element is Ranjit has already touched, so I'll not speak. But at a macro level, we have a policy support. Just look at this 3 ways. We have an RPO mechanism in multiple states, which driving states to buy power. Now power has become competitive, but even when it was on the cusp of becoming competitive, this RPO mechanism in its own way was working. There is a policy intervention. If 3 years back or 4 years back we had this conference, the number one challenge would have been how do we evacuate such large amount of power from solar states to non-solar states, right? And somehow the system responded, and I think we have large amount of evacuation capacity which has silently been set up, which has actually become one of the key enablers for we do larger projects. So plus There are other policy, for example, there is an ISTS charge waiver, the cost is being socialized by other sectors. So some of these macro policy enablers are very, very important for the success, has been very important, and probably will continue to be very important. So these are the few things we did right. Now the next question, I'll just take a minute on specifically, how does the intermittent nature of solar now face the reality of, the reality, the demand side requirements. So I think this is the stage where we are still under experimentation, right? If you follow the scene, even the government in the SECI are trying multiple objects. They are trying wind and solar hybrids. They are trying round-the-clock power. There is talk about getting storage involved. So this is a puzzle where I think the jury is still out. The cost structures and the technology is still evolving. One way of looking at it is, sometimes you don't really look at first mover advantage. There can be a second mover advantage. So what we should do is look at countries like Europe and some of the US states. What have they been doing to do this? And there the sensitivity is less. Those places actually are experimenting with some of the technologies. Now we should be looking at how do we introduce some of those things in India. One mechanism, one thought that as ACME we now have increasingly believe is that battery is going to be the solution for storage is something which we are not completely on board. The more we understand and see battery, we realize maybe we lost a few years thinking that this is going to be the ultimate panacea. But I think the increasing thought process within our group, and this is where we are also investing, is towards other options like hydrogen, like green nitrogen, as being
right.
the complementary energy forms to give us stability. This is a work in progress, Kanika, but that's where the excitement would be.
Yeah, exactly. Never a dull day in the energy transition. Mr. Buttukuri, I want to turn to you to really open up this discussion a little bit, because the rapid advances that we have made in the generation of renewable power is not matched by advances made in the rest of the value chain. So to really be a powerhouse, one would argue it's not enough just to have panels and turbines on the ground. You really need to capture the economic gains from that overall transition. So with that, would you then say that we are in fact not yet a powerhouse, or there's some work to be done?
No. Good morning, Kanika. Good morning to all panelists. I think you have asked a very, very important and right question for me to speak about. I think I have seen the renewable energy from 1998, been in the sector for over little over 2 decades. And what I have seen is tremendous amount of transition happened in the renewable energy space. From, it as if you do a favor by installing a renewable energy plant to a situation where you can't live with because of economic reasons, not because of climate reasons. Today, this is the cheapest source of power, especially solar. And 17-18 rupees in 2010 to about 2 rupee 33 through 2 rupee 34 paisa. Phenomenal achievement as a country. Okay, I think India has shown the way to the global economies how to bring down the cost of solar energy. As I think many countries have learned quite a lot from India's story, as far as bringing down the cost is concerned. And we have emerged as practically we didn't have 0 megawatt installations in 2008, 2009. If I remember Madam Gauri Singh here. Okay, she is the one being the secretary in joint secretary in MNRE. I remember 1 megawatt plant, 5 or 6 plants she was giving, to the different people. 1 megawatt plants, and 1 megawatt was supposed to be a very, very large plant in those days. Today we're talking about 300 megawatt each plant, 500 megawatt plant, maybe a gigawatt kind of a plants. It's not a small achievement, to be frank with you. It's a huge achievement as a country. And there were no IPPs at all in the country way back in 2009, 2008. Today you have got sizable number of respected size IPPs in the country, funded by who's of the PEs or pension funds or utilities, global utilities come to India and turned into renewable energy IPPs. It's a great achievement. And as a country, we have actually supported this whole thing by building the excellent grid infrastructure. There was no infrastructure at all for evacuating this power. and we emerged as third largest, renewable energy installations country in the world. It's not a mean achievement. It's a great achievement we all should feel proud of. All these things have worked exceedingly well. What did not work? Okay. I think all this at what cost? 35 gigawatt solar. At what cost? What is the value addition we have done? We have imported everything. Practically, maybe 10-15%, maybe, the local components we have used. Otherwise, everything we imported. If it would have been allowed, we would have imported structures also, steel structures also. So it costed the country quite a lot, and no jobs. This is the time to really focus on. Okay, and I wanted to share here our friend neighboring country, the China, has taken a different strategy. They focused on manufacturing between 2010 to 2015. And they got into their power generation assets. They have started building only from 2014, 2015 in a sizable manner. Whereas India has subsidized power between 2010 to 2015 in billions of dollars, let me tell you. But we didn't focus on manufacturing at all. Whereas China went and captured global markets. There is a strategic difference. If you see National Solar Mission, we talked about manufacturing, but we did not implement. We did not have focus on manufacturing at all. It is the time now. We really need to focus, because we can save billions of dollars. I mean, if you see, in the next, by 2030, we are talking about $60-70 billion imports. You can arrest all that with just an investment of $4-5 billion. All that it takes for a 20 gigawatt manufacturing base with a complete ecosystem, from polysilicon to module, including inverters, everything, is not more than $5 billion. The amount of money we invest into solar farms every year is close to about $10 billion. Close to about $10 billion is the kind of an investment. 50% of 1 year investment, if you put into manufacturing, we become self-sufficient, and will be the second largest manufacturer in the world. It is a question of focus which is required, which is missing. Fortunately, with Atmanirbhar and all that, Government of India and Modi ji is very, very, Honorable Prime Minister Modi is very keen on building manufacturing base. We have got all wherewithal to do this. I think we have that's something where we completely gone wrong as a country. Okay, we are capable of building this, and we can do that. Other issues where we have gone wrong. In my view, the right place for solar is not just IPPs. Distributed generation. Every house, every factory can produce its own, consume the power. You don't need such huge infrastructure of transmission lines and all that. We went wrong. We have not been able to be successful in deploying rooftop solar and distributed solar. We need to do that so that households can produce and consume power, and industries can produce and consume power, and every district can have its own solar plant and meet the power requirements within the district than having centralized kind of a large solar farms. We should transit from a large IPP driven projects to a larger, to some extent, balance to a distributed. Second thing, agriculture. We consume a lot of power, and many of the DISCOM problems are coming from agriculture. Why don't you solve that problem once for all? Solarize all the pump sets, period. I think we didn't do that. We have not been successful in that. We started that. I think we need to do that. That's another area. And the third thing is, the technology, front. I think we definitely need to go more and more storage-based solar solutions, because they are dispatchable. And solar storage costs are coming down the same way of solar power generation cost. Okay, it is taking the same kind of a graph. If you see, the costs are dropping down quite a lot. Now it is about close to about 4-5 rupees. Today, solar plus storage is cheaper than generating power through diesel genset. All industries can actually adopt solar plus storage. These are all the things where I say, we should transit from where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you really have opened up this discussion, and I would actually argue that, though, while you're absolutely right about the opportunities that we have perhaps, not capitalized on, one can say that it was because affordability was kept as sort of front and center, and whether it was manufacturing domestically, whether it was more decentralized approaches, those are all less affordable per unit, but perhaps not at an economy-wide level. So with that, actually, I want to pose one more set of questions before we take some questions from the audience. And again, to you, Ms. Singh, I think to think about the energy transition in any part of the world, it's not a straight line linear discussion. It's complex, but especially in emerging markets where you are trying to balance affordability of power along with kind of economic growth, but also energy security. And energy security is now coming in the form of, we must manufacture domestically in this Atmanirbhar move that the Prime Minister is promoting. But it also initially came from reducing a reliance on imported fuel. So where do you think is kind of the fine balance, and what are the trade-offs, and what are some of the unfair trade-offs that we sometimes kind of, put front and center, which are actually not they're red herrings rather than real trade-offs?
Kanika, first of all, let me say that some of the statements and facts that fellow panelists have put have actually made this whole discussion much more interesting. Because if you remember when we were talking about National Solar Mission, there was a very clear clause for local content. And in any policy, there is lobbies for it, there are lobbies against it. Whatever is the kind of equilibrium you reach, that's how you move forward. So at this juncture, and to the question that you've posed, I think I just want to say that in this segment and in this sector, I think the strength that the country has all come out through manufacturing, strong IPPs, ecosystem, regulators being supportive, and all those are definitely there. But I think the biggest strength has been that there was innovation in policy. There was if you remember in 2009, 2010, when this National Solar Mission was getting implemented, the whole world was actually talking of only one way of moving forward, which was the feed-in tariff. And there was a completely new framework that set in place a really robust way to go forward for large deployments. And I think we've really done very well insofar as grid-connected solar deployment is concerned. The ecosystem is there, and there's this really, strength that we can rely on to build our way forward. Now, I do understand that what you're talking about is how do we actually move to the other end-use sectors, and where renewable power has really not made a difference. But I would actually, before going there, just take a few minutes to also highlight some of the opportunities we have. And I did hear Sai Baba talk about it very correctly. I think the big opportunities that we have is we have these two schemes, the PM Kusum scheme and the rooftop scheme. I think they're addressing the right segment, but I'm not sure whether they're really framed in a way that they can catalyze entrepreneurial growth and models that will, catalyze this whole segment. So I definitely think that there is an opportunity to commoditize rooftop solar. Why are we looking at the same paradigm that Western countries are looking at? You would recall a very recent study on how the accommodations are in Delhi. And it came out saying that 33% of people stay in rented houses. But that's not to include others who are staying in their own apartments but don't have roof areas. We're talking about a model of deployment and rooftop that might be suitable for Western countries where it's a very different setting in urban areas. But why am I, as a consumer who's willing or who wants to get a benefit of the cheaper power that renewable can give me to have a cost cut in my electricity bills, why do I not have a framework of being a part of this whole, the whole ecosystem? Is the fact that I don't have a rooftop that doesn't allow me to put a smart meter and generate my electricity, is that going to be a kind of a hurdle for me to participate in getting cheaper and more sustainable power? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way India needs to go. And when we are talking about the agriculture sector, very correctly, the analyst said that this is a segment where most of the DISCOMs are extremely uncomfortable because you know that agriculture power is highly subsidized. And one of the main problems they face is because of this gap in revenue that they're never able to fulfill. But can that actually be turned into an opportunity? And that's where, really the next level of policy making has to be addressed. And I think we can do it. I think we have the expertise, we have the wherewithal to make that happen. And I definitely think that, again, similarly in the industrial and commercial applications of solar, the reason why it's not happening is because the DISCOMs feel that these are the consumers who are, our best consumers. And if we move them away, then what would it do to our, our revenue inflows? These are real concerns, but we need to look at them squarely, address them through policy, and all of us know that, a policy push can leverage 3 to 4 times the impact. And that's where I think we have an opportunity in all the segments where we need to really make a push to make India where it can reach and to take advantage of all the fantastic ecosystem that we've developed in this sector over the last decade and more.
I couldn't agree more. I think the key to the transition is actually designing fit for purpose solutions. And if I can just talk a little bit about the work that we're doing, whether it's with electricity utilities or with SECI and others, is actually to support them through evidence-based approaches to design business models, to design approaches to think about the value of distributed renewables into the grid system, etc. But actually very much taking a cue from what you are suggesting is that our transition will not look exactly the same as of any other country. And so we need to design what works for us. And I think for that, Mr. Jain, I want to come to you. Is the focus then really, because we've made these big leaps in installations as well as in sort of price discovery, do you think that this is the right moment for us at a policy level to also be expanding? Some of the kind of, experimentation, I would say, that SECI is doing in terms of the bid design, whether it's round the clock, whether it's kind of solar plus manufacturing. And do you think that innovation is happening at the pace that is required, or is there appetite from industry for even more?
I really appreciate what Ms. Gauri Singh just now mentioned, that you need innovation in technology, that is sure, but you need innovation in policy making also. I believe the solar missions and all were innovations. And they have brought you so far, but that's about it. They brought you so far. I believe the next point of inflection is, and this government has already started thinking of, is the amendment to the Electricity Act. What we are trying to do is we should not address problems in bits and pieces. A problem comes and we try to address it. That's probably the Electricity Act. What we are trying to do is something which will holistically take care of some of the problems which this sector is facing. I strongly believe that the direct benefit transfer scheme, which probably AP has just now announced also, and the Electricity Act also talks about that, it could be a game changer in this sector. And the concerns of the utilities, which she was talking about, that because there are high-paying consumers and we are subsidizing the farmers, it all goes away. The high-paying consumers' cost comes down and the farmers pays the normal rate. I believe then that for DISCOM it is consumer agnostic. Whether a farmer takes the electricity or a commercial takes the electricity, for him, okay, there'll be a partial gap. I'm sure there'll be graded that you can't charge a commercial industrial establishment exactly the same what you're charging to a farmer. But the fact remains is you're being paid for what you are actually costing. That's important. So once you do that, I don't see why we should be pushing for a rooftop considering the demographics of India. If you look at Indian houses versus the European houses where rooftops have been hugely successful, many of the European houses have sloping roofs where the roof does not have any use except the slope. You put up quantum of rooftop panels on them and it works fine for them. Because also it was a sort of a business for them because the energy was sold at high subsidized prices to the grid, like Germany is a case in point.
Right.
Well, India is a poor country. You cannot continue to subsidize anything for a long period of time. And that also makes a point that we should do away with our fad in every sector. And I'm not talking of renewables alone, that low cost matters everything. This low cost and L1 concept should go away for now, for God's sake, so that innovation in technology comes in and we move forward. Well, we all claim that the tariffs have come down to 2.36. I give huge credit to the Indian EPC, but we must give credit to the Chinese also.
Exactly.
So they are responsible for bringing down that cost by 50%. But having said that, isn't the Indian government also responsible for bringing down these tariffs? They are subsidizing your transmission by zero cost. But for how long? So my suggestion to the government is, let us now innovate on a policy front where we look at it comprehensively: generation, transmission, distribution, and manufacturing. Everything has to be interlinked. But more important, which probably nobody talks on any of these forums, is what happens to the R&D and innovation, both in wind, solar, anywhere else. Because what is going to happen is, you today push for a current technology of manufacturing and the technology changes rapidly. In next 4 years, we'll be back to square one.
Right.
So that is extremely essential for all of us. And so is in the transmission. Policy innovations are required. This free subsidies will not work in the long run. So we have to
Right.
see 2.5 rupees tariff remains without subsidies.
So we're actually approaching the end of the session, and I do want to hear from the remaining 3 panelists as well. So I'm going to start blending in the audience questions with the questions that I was posing to you before. Mr. Gupta, from you then, just kind of the trade-offs that I laid out at the start of the second round of questions, but also what the audience would like to know is what kind of policy innovation, since we have been discussing that, is required for greater buy-in from at the subnational level. And it's not just state governments, right? So of course, state governments are where the large focus has been, but there is even, further down and especially if you start thinking about DRE applications, etc., the other administrative levels of governance also become important. So what can be kind of the incentives for them to promote the transition rather than kind of hinder it?
I actually, believe that we should not have any incentives and we should not have any subsidies and we should not have any of these, things that artificially change the marketplace. Right, just like Sunil mentioned about the transmission, and the government has taken a decision the waiver to go away in 2023 June. I think it's a step in the right direction. It's time that renewable energy stood on its own foot. And see, at the end of the day, India is a developing country, right? I mean, it's very good to be aware of climate and so on and so forth. And it's good that currently with the pricing of renewable, we are doing what we have to do as far as the renewable energy mix in the energy basket is concerned. But at the end of the day, we have to make decisions which make sense commercially also to the consumer, right? And we have a large group of consumers, the farmers and poorer people who do need to get cheaper power. And if the cheaper power today is thermal, then so be it, right? I mean, we should do thermal. Thankfully, the cheaper power today is renewable, and therefore, it makes sense to do more and more renewable. However, like I mentioned in my earlier remarks, intermittency is a problem, and the innovation that we need is power which is renewable but dispatchable. The government, SECI and MNRE have done a great job in coming out with peaking tenders, with RTC tenders, trying to connect solar and wind power with thermal, connecting solar and wind power with hydro. Perhaps 2, 3, 4 years down, it would be connecting them with the battery systems when the battery systems become commercially viable. At the end of the day, we need to go for power that is renewable, power that is dispatchable, so that we don't have to bank on other sets of power. But then the main thing is that the dispatchable renewable energy needs to be cheaper than other sources of power for the country, right? Though I know that, for example, Sai Baba spoke about rooftop, I would tend to agree with Sunil that rooftop, it has limited application in India. The focus on rooftop, and Azure runs a rooftop business too. It's a tough business. The payments are a concern. Even when you're selling rooftop power to the government, it's a concern because many times the government departments who are supposed to sign a power purchase agreement with you and pay you for the power are not even aware fully of what exactly are they gaining. This is just extra work for them, right? The way you can get 2 rupees 36 paisa or 2 rupees 50 paisa power from ground mounted utility scale projects, you will not get from rooftop. So what is the point then? I mean, the infrastructure for evacuation exists, the distribution exists. So therefore, we have to, use that and invest in that. Having a rooftop solar for catering to the needs of the people who live in that house or in that apartment building is not something which is happening anytime soon. And you will still need a distribution system. It's not the need for the distribution system is not going away. Correct. So, at the end of the day, the solutions have to be fit for purpose, and they need to be low-cost solutions which make sense for India. I 100% agree that it is time now that Make in India kicks in and we start pushing the manufacturing sector in India. I think that the government has done it the right way, in fact, that we have focused on the cost of power. Once the cost of power is low enough, we can now perhaps do a little bit of subsidy on the manufacturing side. So because once we start manufacturing in India, like Sunil mentioned, one of the big drivers for the low cost of power today is the imports that we do from China. So once we are trying to manufacture in India for the first few years, we will need to support that industry to ensure that that industry can find its feet. And in that time, the tariffs will move up to some extent, maybe by 10% to 15% easily. So, I mean, a 2 rupees 50 paisa tariff will become a 2 rupees 80, 2 rupees 90 paisa tariff on the back of local manufacturing. But that's okay. 2 rupees 80, 2 rupees 90 for 4 or 5 years. It doesn't make any difference at all to the end consumer, literally. And it'll create jobs. It'll create the right infrastructure. It'll create a lot of being a leader as far as India is concerned on the manufacturing side. So it is the right time to focus on manufacturing for us. So our solutions, solutions for India need to be tailor-made for India, and they should not be copied from any other country, because all countries are different.
I think that's been sort of the running theme in your responses, and a very important one. We're nearly at time. So I'm going to give you the last word, Mr. Vutukuri, but before that, I'd like Mr. Sixaria to come in maybe just for a minute. Very sorry to sort of put you on the clock like that. But I did want you, Mr. Sixaria, to just sort of talk also a little bit about, some of the big bets that you were saying around green hydrogen. How does that square with viability and commercials, which, are quite some way out in the future, especially around innovation of R&D? But really 1 minute for this very complex question.
No, I'm fine. So just which will end the discussion. In terms of going ahead, see what we have to do is electricity share in the overall energy has to increase. So we can't just rely on putting in energy and making more energy into the system. So one of the ways to do it is use it in transportation, use it in cooking, find other applications, right? So one area, for example, when we say hydrogen or green hydrogen, almost 80-90% of the raw material cost in that is electricity consumption. So why not use electricity for that? That has a market. Of course, there is some gap between the commercial viability and the gray hydrogen cost that can be bridged in over next 3 to 5 years. So that is something which we should do. Two more points on how we go forward is, we can, I believe, and as a company, we believe that farmers, we can make a strength because they are almost 17 to 18% of the consumption we have. The advantage is they don't need power at demand. They can substitute their power requirement during the day. And that is where once we have the smart metering and the smart grid combined, that will actually act as a reverse storage of sort for us. So that is a policy innovation that can happen. And third policy innovation that we would like, I'm sure government is considering, that allow the market to play. Now we are starting to get an exchange which has some semblance of becoming vibrant. So why not hybrid that with the renewable? Let renewable produce, and for providing, for correcting the curve, let them buy power from the exchange and provide it to the government. So these are some of the things we can do. And I think that's what we are looking forward towards.
No, I think innovation and market design is, again, complements this innovation in policy that's also really required. Last word to you, Mr. Vattukuri. You also have only 1 minute, but I'd also like you to talk about COVID impact a little bit, and to say that there'll be so much government spending now. Is this an opportunity for us to pivot rather than actually move backwards?
No, absolutely. Thank you, Kanika. Actually, it's a huge opportunity, COVID spending, not only in India, globally, because Europe has unveiled a huge program for renewables, because they want to revive their economy by using renewable as an opportunity. I think India has got a great opportunity to participate in this, and also in US. They have huge plans. How do we participate? Some of our EPC companies can go there, IPPs also can go there, and some of the manufactured products in India, from India, can be exported out there. Okay, and huge opportunity. That's one. And second thing, coming back, I think I must address this, what my friend Ranjit has talked about rooftops. Let me just clarify that when I say rooftops, it's not just rooftops. Distributed generation. For example, a district has got a consumption of say 10 megawatt. A town has got a consumption of 10 megawatt. There is no need to produce in Rajasthan and take the power, build a huge infrastructure all the way, because the beauty of solar is, distributed generation is possible only with solar, because the energy resource is available all over the country in an equally distributed. There are great opportunities. So I would say that way. And the second thing is energy farming. Agriculture farming, why don't we transform ourselves to energy farming? There are hundreds of people, farmers, committing suicide in the states like AP, Telangana, and all that, and some places in UP and all that. Why don't we allow them to produce power and feed power? A half a megawatt plant is not a difficult thing to maintain. Or 250 kilowatt is a difficult thing to maintain. Only thing is we have to ensure that money is made available to them. Apart from producing their dependence on power requirement from the state, they can actually, like what Rajat said, there is a beauty that you can actually pump the water whenever you want, so there is no need that it has to be pumped at a so-and-so time for wetting the fields. So give that opportunity to them and allow them to produce power. And tail end grid voltage is a major issue that also will get resolved. Make Indian agriculture farmer to energy farmer as well, than doing a centralized large scale 500,000 megawatt kind of plants. This is the transition what I'm talking about. I think I would request probably you or somebody to really do a study, what it costs for building a transmission infrastructure and what it costs to subsidize a little bit more into the distributed solar generation. What makes sense as a country, whether we should transform or whether we should continue what we are doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this discussion has been very heartening, because all of you have kind of laid out a very nice, clear vision for the way forward. which actually shows that there is appetite, but there is also kind of, space for growth, and everyone is looking bullish to the future despite these otherwise very difficult COVID-struck times. On behalf of everyone at CEW, I must say we have to thank each and every one of you for your leadership. It's been really our privilege to work with all of you, and it has been my privilege today to host this discussion. My takeaway is that India's energy transition will be fit for purpose, will be based on innovation across the value chain, and must focus on comprehensive value capture for the domestic economy. With that, thank you very much. I think we've set the tone quite nicely for the rest of the day, and I'll hand back over to the organizer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanika. I think you summarized that very well. I think the tone has been set beautifully. It was a fantastic panel, and it's not necessary that in a 50-minute discussion, we all come with a solution. It was nice to see differing views, and I'm sure we will come to some roadmap for India becoming a renewable energy powerhouse over the next decade. Great points. Thank you, Gauri Singh, Sunil Jain, Ranjit Gupta, Rajat Seksaria, and Sai Baba Wutukuri for your insights and thoughts. And thank you, Kanika, for doing a fantastic job of moderating this panel.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very
thanks,
much.
Iti. Thanks,
I wish
Kanika.
each
Thank
of you and your respective organizations the very best going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kanika. Thank you, everyone. Really, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we move on to the first poll question. Kindly participate in large numbers. This poll is for you. Please minimize the player button so that you can view the poll question to the right of your screen. You will have 60 seconds to choose your option. Post-poll results being displayed. We will be back on the other side with the next live session. Happy polling.